There is no excuse for slavery at all. This is the movie Amistad. It's a video that portrays what it was like. We are all the same in the eyes of God. It doesn't matter whether we're black, rich, or poor. There is no excuse for any race to take another race as slaves. Some of my best friends when I grew up in Cleveland were black, African American. And I'm making this video intentionally to illustrate a point. I have a very good friend of mine. She's an older woman that has done a lot to support me. She said that I should try a narration to make my videos different. There was a lot of money in the slave trade 180 years ago. African villagers would take each other as slaves. You know, the saddest thing was that people would turn on each other. Neighboring Africans would take other Africans as slaves and sell them to the British to make money. This is Cinque, and this is his story about his life. Cinque was taken as a slave, and he was put aboard a slave ship. He watched people and his family die aboard that slave ship. I won't waste a lot of time talking except when I feel it's necessary. It doesn't matter where we come from, whether we're black, white, Russian, Indian, or poor. We're all human beings in the eyes of God. We all have the same feelings. We all have to raise our families. We all have someone we love more than ourselves to share our life with. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts does not recognize themselves as as a state. They call themselves the Commonwealth. They were one of the original 13 colonies. And the English people, the British, decided to use slave labor when they could not deal with farming the fields on their own. This video is very graphic. It should be R-rated, but I put it on my website for a reason, to illustrate how wrong slavery is. How wrong it is for people to take for one race to enslave another. We are all the same in the eyes of God. None of us have the right to enslave another human being. The slaves endured, the people that were taken as slaves, the African Americans endured torture, horrendous punishment and abuse. I did not write a script. I'm narrating this based on how I feel. There's no script. I'm just watching this right now and saying how I feel. When I look at these African Americans, these are people, and they're chained up, and they'll probably suffer on this voyage across the Atlantic. It makes me want to cry. They endured horrible things when they had to be transported from their homeland to a new land where they would be taken as slaves and treated so unfairly and so unkindly. A picture is worth 1,000 words. A video is worth about 10 million. This is the movie Amistad. This is what it was like for the slaves on the decks below the ships in a storm. A lot of people did not survive. Babies and the elderly and the young women drowned when the walls of the sea would pour on upon the decks. Here's a baby that the people are trying to hold up to keep from drowning when the storm seas are coming in from the ships, from the ship's decks. Cinque had the courage to rebel against his captors, and they took the ship to try to get back home. But another English ship took them back. This is what it was like when Cinque had to bury his own people. They had no burial. They just had to take the dead and throw them into the ocean. They had no gravesite, nothing, when they lost their loved ones. They just threw them over the side of the ship as the English people played a simple tune. Here, these are the black people that are being whipped and tortured. For what purpose by these English people? They're being whipped because they're black, a different color of skin, because maybe they fought back against their captors. They didn't want to be taken as slaves. They're being whipped and tortured. They have chains around them. For what reason? Because the British people just could not handle doing their own work. They had to take other people and make them as slaves. Here is Cinque. Here's a girl that has a baby. She doesn't want to go back to America and be a slave. She thinks it's better to die, and she commits suicide and throws herself off the ship. Cinque stands brave, but in his heart he wants to weep. Here's another. This man is being whipped and tortured for perhaps trying to stand up for himself and not be taken as a slave. It's so hard to believe that when I have some good friends that are African Americans, that their ancestors had to endure this torture from people that descended from the Commonwealth. When they took the slaves aboard the ships, they didn't have much food to feed these people. Perhaps they knew they could not feed everybody aboard the slave ships. They knew they couldn't. They did not have enough food to feed all these slaves. Therefore, they knew that some of them would have to be thrown overboard, which is despicable. These people were proud people in their village. They were respected. They had wives and families. Now they're on chains, eating like animals. The English people, the British, treated these slaves, these human beings, like animals. Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, descends from England. They do not recognize themselves as a state because Massachusetts is still part of England. I am ashamed to live in Massachusetts when it was a colony that did this. Massachusetts is a colony that encouraged slavery and supported this abuse towards other human beings. I have no respect for the Commonwealth. When they had too many slaves and they could not feed the slaves, they decided to just simply throw them overboard, take rock ballast and kill people, murder them because they couldn't feed all their slaves. This is very graphic. Cinque watches as perhaps some of his friends and family are thrown overboard. They're all chained to a rock ballast and drowned. I believe about 20 or more slaves, innocent black African-American human beings, decent people were killed and murdered in this scene. They're drowned. They're put to their deaths, chained to a rock ballast and thrown overboard. Why were these people killed? Because the captain did not want to feed all these people. He was too lazy to feed all the black African Americans. It was easier to drown them than to feed them. Why feed these people when they weren't human beings according to the British? The captain decided to just drown 30 people that he could not afford to feed. This is deplorable. There is no excuse for slavery. There is no excuse to abuse another human being. There is no excuse for one race to enslave another. We are all the same. It does not matter where we come from, what color skin we have, what language we speak. In the eyes of God, we're all equal. Slavery is the worst thing that has ever happened. We think Chernobyl was the worst thing that could happen to humanity. A nuclear reactor blowing up and putting nuclear waste into the atmosphere. What you're seeing here, the mistreatment of people being taken as slaves and sold, taken out of their homeland and abused the way you're seeing right now, is far worse than a nuclear reactor blowing up. When a nuclear reactor explodes, it can poison the human body, but people have the skills to survive this. How could any human being survive watching their brother or sister or mother be put on an auction block and be sold as a slave, or watching someone in their family die aboard a slave ship? That is far worse than a nuclear tragedy. My video is so simple. My narration is simple. We are all the same in the eyes of God. We're all human. It does not matter what color skin we have, as I say. It doesn't matter what language we speak. We are all children of the eyes of God. We all have gifts and abilities. We all have the same desires to find someone we love more than ourselves, to share our life with, to reproduce, to raise our families. The white people that ran these slave ships, that committed these horrible crimes, had the same drives and desires and the same needs to eat, to survive, and to raise their families as these black African Americans. So why in God's name did they choose to take people of their same, that were human beings just like themselves, people that were men and women just like themselves, and put them through this kind of torture? It is beyond my capacity to understand. William Cinque was a brave man, and he had the courage to stand up for himself and fight for his freedom.